Special Branch, Bangladesh Police. May I please request all of you to come and take your seat on the stage. Before we start with speeches from our presenters, I'm requesting Richard Miles to come and give a few thoughts from what he takes away from yesterday's discussions. Richard, can I ask you to come up, please?
Good morning, and first of all, thank you for all arriving promptly, and it's very rewarding to the organisers to see so many people have come again for today. Yesterday we had some very eminent speakers in the room, but of all the things that were said yesterday, the thing that sticks in my mind was the quote from the Honourable Speaker: refuge of the law. People in Bangladesh need the refuge of the law. And what we are trying to achieve is that people can have that. The role of restorative justice in reconnecting stakeholders is important. Many people in Bangladesh have given up on trying to access justice. But we heard from Professor Braithwaite that that is not only a problem in Bangladesh, it's a problem around the world. It's a problem where people are being frustrated by the democratic process no longer working for them. As a young democracy, Bangladesh has the chance to do something about that. Innovation is needed to achieve that, and this conference is about innovation. The good thing that we learned from the work that all of you did yesterday afternoon is that the distance between current practice in Bangladesh and the goal of restorative justice is not a big distance. The amount of work that is needed, the amount of changes that are needed, are not that fundamental. What we learned from the experienced speakers yesterday is that we must not rush change. Change needs to be gradual. It needs to be accepted by all stakeholders. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. You have to wait until it is thirsty. I was very encouraged by the responses from Bangladesh police yesterday. As a former police officer, I know that in many arenas, police resist restorative justice. They see restorative justice as something that is taking away their power. And I was most encouraged at the responses and the fact that Dr. Patwari is sitting up here this morning, that police are in a position and willing to make the changes necessary. If those changes take place, then the consequence is that the most vulnerable people in society will begin to re-engage with the justice system. We know from the justice audit that the majority of people, if they are victims of crime, do not go to the formal justice system. They see it as too remote, too distant, not something they can use. By introducing restorative justice systems, we can start remedying those problems, particularly for the most vulnerable, for the poor, for empowerment of women. What also came out, and what I anticipate from discussions with Justice Lyons, is that we need to have the practice first. This is a bottom-up process. The rules, regulations and laws to support this should follow practice, not dictate it. Because of, and we will hear today from other speakers, experience from around the world shows that restorative justice is more of a policy intervention, a principled intervention. It is not a cutout that you can lay somewhere and do this, this and this. It has to evolve from society. And as I said, the practices that are already taking place in Bangladesh are really close to moving into restorative practices. So I hope everyone finds the work this morning and the presentations interesting. I'm grateful for the speakers, braving the traffic and the weather, as Tahira said. And I also thank all of you for coming here and giving us the benefit of your experience and your knowledge. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much. We will now move on to our speakers, and I will be calling upon first Judge Sean Lyons. Each of you, 3 speakers, will have half an hour each, and I will be sitting over there and showing you this when you have 5 minutes left. For those of you who don't know Judge Sean Lyons, he is the resident judge at the Wood Green Crown Court of the United Kingdom. He's been a pioneering contributor in recruiting senior judges in the initial restorative justice trials in the UK. He is currently supporting the second round of these trials in the Crown Court. He has won an award for his work on case management. And I've had the pleasure of watching him in one of his courts, and I wish that all of you who are part of the judiciary once get a chance to see him, how he manages his court. Judge Sean Lyons, over to you now.
Mr. Hack, fellow guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is the custom on occasions like this to say how honored and delighted I am to be here. I wish to say more. I have been in this country 3 days. I have been amazed and impressed by the professionalism, the dedication, the enthusiasm, and the optimism and the determination that I have met. Yesterday was, for me, an extraordinary experience to have 200 or 300 people from extremely varied professional backgrounds, and indeed so many young people, and I do accept, to me, everybody is young, was illuminating. I know I do not feel alone in that, because there's a group of very old, hardened English policemen down there, and they feel the same way. So, yes, I am honored to be here. Yes, I am delighted to be here. But more than that, I am very proud to be here, and I'm extremely grateful for the invitation that was extended to me. I will now take off my watch to watch my timing, because I am more frightened of the lady in charge than I am of the Lord Chief Justice. Now, one of the many freedoms a speaker has is the organizers give you the title of your speech, but you provide the content. And I have decided to approach the subject of restorative justice in the courts of the United Kingdom in a slightly roundabout way. This is as a result of the speeches I heard yesterday morning, which made me think again. There are two themes I want to pick up on. One was the contrast drawn by Mr. Jeremy Simons between Western resolution of conflict by conflict and the Oriental community resolution of conflict without conflict. The other theme I want to take is that which was so expertly laid before us by Mr. Azadullah, emphasizing the extreme flexibility of restorative justice to be applied at any stage of proceedings, even long after judicial proceedings have finished, in prison with hardened, long-term, repeat offenders. It led me to think, why has the Western model gone the way it has? And if we say Western and mean common law, and we all share the wonderful heritage of flexible common law, the answer is found in something we now accept as absolutely basic, and that is the rule of law. The rule of law is an essential part of democracy, and its exercise is an essential part of nationhood. And very simply, by the rule of law, we mean one rule in the land, one rule that applies to all, and no one is above it. And so I thought of how this had come about. And this is a good year to think about this. This year is the 800th anniversary of the signing of Magna Carta. And from all round the common law world, political leaders, judges, business leaders, and others are coming to London to join what appears to be almost endless celebrations of the signing of Magna Carta. But the story does not start with Magna Carta. It starts earlier, in about 1170. Henry II came to the throne after a bloody and devastating civil war, which was so severe and so horrendous, the people of the country said at that time that for 13 years God and his angels were asleep. Henry II was an able, wise, and very clever man. Once the two sides in the Civil War had exhausted the country and themselves, he was king, and he said to the nobles, the barons, in modern parlance, the warlords, you will keep your lands, you will keep your forces, you will still owe me loyalty, and you will support me against my enemies. But you will no longer make your own laws, you will no longer run your courts. There will be one law in this land, it will be the king's law. And the barons, not being as clever as King Henry, thought they'd got away quite lightly. But Henry knew that law was a powerful tool. He used it to consolidate his position. In future, the citizen seeking justice would come to the king. The king was the fount of justice. He also knew it would unify the kingdom. And what we must remember is that kingdom was within 100 years of conquest by the Norman French. So there was a Norman French elite sitting on a vast Anglo-Saxon majority who themselves were hated by the original inhabitants who'd been pushed into the mountains of the west. We now call them Welsh. And in northern England and eastern England, there were the remainder of the previous wave of invasion, Danish men and Norwegians, the Vikings. And so King Henry said, no Norman French law, no Anglo-Saxon law, no Welsh law, no Norwegian law, no Danish law. One law, and it is mine. And I was thinking about that when I was listening to Jeremy Simons yesterday. There is in England no three-horse solution. There is no four-buffalo solution. There is one law, public law, and it is a jealous law. It does not like private law. It will not tolerate it. And that, to some extent, forms part of the stony ground upon which restorative justice may fall in the United Kingdom. The weapon the king forged was a powerful one, and it turned in the hand of his son, King John, to strike the king, because he misused this powerful tool his father had placed in his hand, and he achieved the impossible. He got all the warlords to agree, but they agreed against him. And they took him to Runnymede, and they forced him to sign Magna Carta. The thing that always amazed me, they had the king in their power, his forces were tiny, they could exert their will upon him, they did not seek their powers back, they sought two things: to limit the way he exercised his power and to make him subject to the law himself. Now, it would be simple and oversimple to say at that point the rule of law was formed. That was 800 years ago. It was much messier than that, much more untidy. And it was centuries before all the little courts and practices round the United Kingdom were squeezed out. And any law student who wants to read a litany of medieval courts should look at the Courts Act 1971, Schedule E, and all the courts that were thereby abolished. In fact, they weren't working or extant, but they had never been abolished. So, we have a Western model which insists on the supremacy of one law, and because it was Anglo-Saxon, it is a harsh law, and it is a forbidding law, and it is a punitive law. And that, of course, meant that the next development came from an unexpected direction. The citizen seeking redress of his rights against wrongs done to him criminally would go to the police to make complaint. The police would investigate, and if it then led to a charge, the process was irreversible. The charge takes the case to the Crown Prosecution Service, who take it to the court, and there is no turning back. But it is the police who were the interface between the system and the citizen who realized this was too heavy a tool, too unwieldy, too strong for many of the requirements. And so it is the police themselves that started restorative justice in the 60s and 70s. Richard Miles is nearly as old as me and remembers where it started with Sir Charles Pollard. And there have been flowerings of restorative justice in various parts of the United Kingdom, almost without exception led by the police. And we have here, amongst this group of ancient mariners, people who've been doing it for years, and who, I believe, feel disappointed that restorative justice has not spread more widely or thrown out deeper roots. I do not share, although I understand, that feeling of disappointment, because given I've been talking about 850 years, 20 doesn't seem very long. And I now want to turn to what the position for restorative justice is in the UK today. It is government policy. I hold here the third action plan for restorative justice in the criminal justice system. The first action plan was November 2012. This is November last year. I just want to read a few phrases from it. This is the third resident justice action plan for the criminal justice service. The significant words there are for the criminal justice service, not outside it, in it, part of it, complementary and supplementary. There is a definition. I believe the man we must all call Father Braithwaite will recognize it. For the purposes of this action plan, the Ministry of Defence defines restorative justice as the process which brings those harmed by crime and those responsible for the harm into communication, enabling everyone affected by a particular incident to play a part in repairing the harm and finding a positive way forward. And I'm delighted to say they have the good grace to say this definition is based upon the definition set out by Professor Braithwaite. The other thing I want to read out, and this is where I think there is hope, is this. Key areas for current action plan. There's only one I want to read out. It is this: equal access. Restorative justice is available to victims at all stages of the criminal justice system, irrespective of whether the offender is an adult or a young person. The words I want to concentrate on there are at all stages of the criminal justice system. And as far as I'm concerned, the criminal justice system does not start with a charge. It starts with the citizen going to the police and making a complaint. And I believe that as restorative justice, which is operating in other parts of the CJS at the moment, gains more authority, credence, we will find people moving it back down to the beginning of the process to avoid matters ever becoming subject to the criminal justice system. And at that point, I shall make a link later to where restorative justice is in Bangladesh. We have just, with the money that has been provided for restorative justice, run 10 pilots around the country in 10 different courts. Mine was one of them. They were all very much largely centred post-conviction, post-plea of guilty, and prior to sentence, although in some cases they were after sentence. So they were late in the process. There were 10 plans because the government seems to have got the message that they should not be too prescriptive. Practice should develop and suit the area it's in. But the other reason for having 10 different pilots is that they are now being evaluated by academics and the Ministry of Justice to see if there are common successful elements across the 10 pilots and perhaps common unsuccessful ones, so that without wishing to lay down a standard way of doing it, there will be guidelines about what has been found successful and what is not. So, that's where we stand. What use do the courts make of restorative justice? This then takes me right back to the Western conflict process. Any trial I conduct requires certain things to happen. Firstly, by evidence, it must be proved that an offence was committed. Secondly, by evidence, it must be proved that this man or this woman, the defendant, committed that crime. Thereafter, once that decision has been taken, sentence arises. And the rule of law, which has governed the process to bring him before me for sentence, governs me when it comes to sentence. Of course, I take into account the circumstances of the offender. I take into account the circumstances of the offence. I also take into account the guidance I have from the Court of Appeal on the appropriate span of sentences for this sort of crime. I have to decide whether to use my discretion to be what some of my colleagues sometimes refer to as imaginative, which means spectacularly lenient, because one might feel that the case deserves it. But when doing so, I must remember the rule of law, because any advantage to one man carries with it a disadvantage to the others who were not treated that way. And so, I sentence, and I am required to bear in mind by the rule of law three things. Firstly, the need for punishment. That is very, very Anglo-Saxon. Secondly, the need for deterrence. Will my sentence stop others committing the crime? That is very much a politician's concept. No lawyer, judge, or policeman ever believes that a sentence passed on one person deters another, because the other person committing the crime does not intend to get caught, so it won't apply to him, will it? And then thirdly, almost as a make-sop, we are required to consider the needs to rehabilitate the offender. And if we think about what I have said, the entire trial process, the entire sentence consideration is offender-orientated. I have not used the word victim once. Now, I have been sentencing now as a permanent and as a temporary judge for 26 years. It has even struck me that I am only doing half a job. It is said that sentence is there to right the wrong, and restorative justice is to repair the harm. None of my colleagues, no judge that I have ever talked to, imagines that passing the sentence goes in any way to mend society. The most we can hope for is that the child or the woman or the man who has complained and who has been believed because of the guilty verdict, that can be the start of closure and the healing process. But that is the only hope that we have. But now I have an additional tool. When I sentence, I have before me the report of the Restorative Justice Conference that took place after the plea of guilty and before sentence. And it affects sentence. And I've talked about the flexibility of restorative justice. I want to talk about the flexibility of our shared heritage of common law. That government policy has not required one word of legislation. Restorative justice fits within the criminal justice system without the need for legislation. Even if we go to a system of not coming into the courts and offering pre-CJS system restorative justice, we do not need to legislate because the rights of the citizens are entirely protected. Neither the offender nor the victim need go into restorative justice unless they agree. So it is a process between two parties who agree to undergo it, and if either of them is dissatisfied with the result, then there is always the recourse to go to the formal legal system. No legislation. The only bit of legislation is enabling legislation, and it is this. A very minor change to sentencing law now enables me, when considering sentence following the Restorative Justice Conference and Report, to consider the recommendations of that conference and to include in my official sentence courses of action as a requirement of the court as part of the formal sentence that have been recommended by restorative justice. And so the genius of the common law is weaving restorative justice in with the formal process. It should never be thought of a competition. They are supplementary and they are complementary. Now let me turn to Bangladesh. You too have this same harsh Anglo-Saxon law in your criminal justice system. It is harsh. It says if you commit unlawful murder, we will commit lawful murder. We will execute you. Happily, for more minor offences, King Henry didn't come here. He did not sweep away that bedrock you have, that sense within the community your citizens still have of an alternative path, of arbitration, of village courts, of shilish. That was not swept away. Citizens in the United Kingdom are basically disempowered. They look to the state for everything, not just for justice, but for education, for health, for housing, and for money when they can't or won't work. They have no skill. It is difficult to grow those skills within a community without skilled facilitators. You have a head start on us. You have a community used to exercising those skills over centuries. The great joint enterprise we are talking about here today is not to introduce something new, but it is to change a piece of process in a formulation that is already understood and respected by your own citizens. They are already empowered, and it is the task of everyone here today to push through further empowerment for them. It is not only the right thing to do, and we all know why. Every study says the same. It is so much better for the victim, always. They resume their normal life more quickly. They get over their fear, their distress, their anxiety, perhaps when going out, their anxiety when returning to their own home, which has been broken into. All that is recovered so quickly. The offenders There is clear evidence of reduced reoffending. There is clear evidence that shame and, as Professor Braithwaite pointed out, fear of a future court appearance, if you avoid it this time, are strong deterrents. And above all, and I think still underestimated in the United Kingdom, there is the fact that the satisfaction that this process produces strengthens democracy, strengthens society, and as the word spreads, citizens are more content with the society they live in and more supportive of its structure. If I were a politician, I'd give you all the money you needed, because those prizes, I believe, are virtually priceless. So, where do we go? I don't want to end by wishing you every success, because from what I have seen over the last 3 days, you are going to succeed. I believe your politicians are warm to the idea. If it is in the power of individuals to make it happen, you will. And what I hope is that in 4 or 5 years' time, when restorative justice has become embedded at one end of the UK system, a light can shine from Bangladesh saying, look at what we are doing at the other end. England, you will have much to learn from us. I have nothing more. Thank you for listening, and follow your enterprise.
Judge Lyons, thank you very much for what you said. I'm not going to dare to summarize what was just been said, but actually to call upon our next speaker, Ms. Just one second. Ms. Vidya Nigra, she's been the regional director at the International Institute for Restorative Justice Practices, Europe, on citizenship, community building relations with restorative justice. She has had a tremendous journey, a personal journey, and a journey which has looked at restorative justice from many angles. And we are very interested, Vidya, to hear from you about what that has all meant.
Can I have a little help, please? Good morning. Jó reggelt. This is good morning in my language. And while I'm looking for some help for the computer, I would like to say how honored I am to be invited to this conference, to be with these honorable speakers here and have such a interesting part in this journey, in your journey, which is from several points of view very, very similar to my journey. And this is what I would like to share with you during this half an hour. There is a lot to share, but I will focus mainly on why I am doing what I'm doing and what is working or what worked for me as a Romanian Hungarian. And hopefully we will see that people are similar all over the world. The needs are similar all over the world. And maybe our story can inspire your stories for the future. So let me start with saying that, yes, I'm representing the International Institute for Restorative Practice. I'm the regional director for this institution in Europe. And I became the representative of IARP in 2001. previously, I worked in a reformatory school for juvenile delinquents in Hungary, and all the experience what I had there led me to start to use restorative practices. And I'm using the term restorative practices. You will see why, and maybe I cannot, yeah. So you will see why I'm using the term restorative practices. Thank you so much. The Bangladeshi people are very helpful. The Hungarians are very helpful too, so this is already something what we have in common. So IARP, so the International Institute for Restorative Practices, has different offices in different parts of the world. The main offices are having demonstrational programs, and this is why Hungary is, and UK and other countries are highlighted with yellow. What I said earlier, that I started to work as a psychologist in a juvenile detention for young offenders, where I learned that the majority of the students, although were viewed as offenders, the majority were victimized or their victims in their home. And that was something not unusual. I did a research where we figured out that 78% of our population was victimized before the age of 6. So it was a very early age. And when I'm saying victimized, I mean neglect, emotionally, both physically neglect, and also being a witness of a lot of conflicts in that area, but also witnesses of domestic violence. So the path to become a criminal was quite strong at the early age. So having the students in a reformatory school or in a juvenile detention centers led us to understand that if we would like to help them, we will need to take in consideration how they arrive to us. And I agree very well with Shad Maruna, whose quote is here on the screen, who says that offending, it doesn't happen because of the psychology effects, but it happens also because of a network of relationships and the impact of these relationships and this environment on the child. So if we would like to help children, then we would like to take in consideration all these factors and start to deal with the children in this context. If you would like just to take out somebody from that context and provide support, then we will do something good for that person, but in a long term we will see him back. So what are the points where we are thinking that we should start? Of course, it's the family. A child, if he's raised in the family, then probably the family will have to take some responsibility to make a change in the child's life. But also, we have to think about its social network, also the system, how it's working, especially if a child goes into the juvenile detention center. It's another system. He is going to be told what to do. He is going to follow the rules, but probably he will follow the rules until he is locked up. But when he will go out, without control, without the barriers, if he doesn't build these barriers from inside, the behavior will continue. Because sometimes the expectation of the environment remains the same. If something is punished, somebody is punished and is sent to a center, when he comes home and something wrong is happening, the people will be sure that the person who did the wrong is the one who came out of the prison. The label, and John Braithwaite talked and wrote a lot of the stigmatizing, shaming processes. So the label of being a criminal, it's very hard to demolish if you don't think of these factors. Also, conflicts with inmates will make an impact on recidivism as well. The lack of the communication with the community, as I said, won't help to destroy the label of being a criminal. And also, there will be needs expressed by the victims, which, if we are fortunate, we can take in consideration. But in majority of cases, when somebody goes into a secure unit, he feels victimized, and he forgets that victims out there, they are having their own needs. So it seemed to be a quite huge part of work, what we would like to achieve or what we wanted to achieve. And the question, especially when we realized, based on 500 students research on recidivism, that 75% of them, although they were supported as much as we could, they became, again, criminals, and within 3 months. So we thought that we need to do something to stop this path. And what should we do? So we brainstorm. We have stormed here a lot, so it's not unfamiliar. And in our brainstorm, listening to the stories of the children, the stories of the staff, we came to understand that each crime causes injuries, and all these injuries will create needs, and these needs will require individual responses. It's very difficult to develop a strategy for all, because each individual has different paths and different needs. So, how do we start it? Actually, I had a student who helped me to understand what we need to do. And I will share a little story. In one day, a student was sent to me. I was working as a psychologist, because from the first day when he entered in the juvenile detention center, he was trying to explain to everybody that he is not an offender. And my colleagues were smiling, saying that, yes, of course, nobody is an offender when he comes here. It wasn't him. But because he tried to commit an act of suicide, he was sent to have a psychological support. And I was listening to his story. He came from a good family. He was very well educated. He was at the age of 14 and 2 months, and the criminal age in Hungary is 14. So he just passed 2 months at the criminal age. And he said that he got a present for his birthday from his parents, and this present was a book written by a criminal. A very famous bank robber who wrote a book from the prison, was really a very popular person at the time. And the parents bought the book because he was leading a radio show in his high school. And the parents thought that it would be a good idea to have knowledge on this type of field. So our student saw the book, and after he read it, he decided to try it because it seems too simple, too easy. So he borrowed from his little brother a toy, a gun. And before he had this radio show, he thought that he will try this robbery. So he went into a small bank. He fixed his gun to the cashier, and very politely he said that if she's going to cooperate, nothing will happen with her, but please follow the instruction. He took the money, he went home, he counted to be sure that nothing will be missing, and before 4 o'clock, when the bank is supposed to close, he went back. He saw the police car, he knocked on the window, he said, please take everything away and close this case because these are the money, nothing is missing, you can count. And such a stupid idea to write such books. Unfortunately, he said, the police officer didn't have any sense of humor, and he was sentenced for 3 years. So 3 years of imprisonment for gang robbery, it's a serious punishment for a person of 14. So this is why he was against to take any responsibility. So I was sure that we have somehow to defocus his attention from being sorry for himself to the environment. He was blaming the parents why they bought this book. He was blaming the system why it's creating such a weird institution. He was blaming the police officer why he didn't have sense of humor and so on. So finally, I asked him a question, what I thought that will help. What did he think? How does the woman from the cashier will feel or felt, or what did he think, or how was her day in that occasion? He said, oh, I don't know, I hope she's okay. I didn't have any bad intention towards her. But as a homework, I asked him to write a list with feelings, with thoughts about this incident. And next day he came back to me saying that he couldn't write too much, but here is the phone number of the bank. Let's call the bank. I know that is not something what usually psychologists are doing. They're not so active, but I was curious to see really what happened. The leader of the bank was pleased with the phone call because she said, finally we have an information. We know something. We didn't know who is the person. We didn't know why it happened with us. We didn't know anything. And we are waiting for the report from the court or the police. But it takes too long, so the paperwork takes a long period. When I asked her to give us the phone to the cashier, she said, unfortunately, we cannot speak with her because she's in a psychiatrical unit. This incident when happened was when she was facing a crisis. Her husband lost his job. She was the only one who was able to go to work and to support the family, a big family. So when she was sent home because she was shocked by the incident, the husband saw her coming home and he didn't know what to say, just he asked another question. Why are you here? Why are you not at work? And when she started to explain what happened, he said, why didn't you do anything to stop all this process? What is happening if you are going to be fired? So all these why questions led her to feel that she is the only one responsible. So next day when she went back to her workplace, when she saw somebody coming in the bank, she started to develop panic attack, and quite soon she was hospitalized. So when our boy heard the story, he said, oh my God, I didn't want to do anything like this. I would do anything to repair the harm. We didn't know at the time what is restorative justice, but it was a genuine reaction because of the story what he heard. So we decided to write a letter with his story and send it to the hospital. And within 1 week, the hospital called me back saying that this letter, who was given to the victim, helped the therapy much more than the medication did in the past few weeks. So this is how we realized that it's very important to think broader and to ask specific questions. We were sure that the question why you did it, it's not going to help, but, or at the moment is not helpful. We were sure that the question what happened will really open the field for discussion. Each individual has a different story. So we find the similarities, the informations are our needs, the needs for safety, and I won't mention all of this because this is what we really feel when the problems are happening, and this is universal. But because of this story, I was invited to the International Institute for Restorative Practices, where I got not just the training, but I was able to really work on the field, where I spent 1 year in US, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, as a counselor in a day treatment center for juvenile offenders. And I really learned that beyond the justice system, there are practices what can be used on a daily basis. And these are called restorative practices, which in fact are aiming to build social capital, to build relationships. And these relationships will help to really set up a good discipline for the students, for the families, or for those who are interacting with the system. And everything is based on a participatory learning, on a fair process of engaging people and letting them to be part of decision-making processes. It was a great experience. And after 1 year, I decided to quit all my jobs in the government because I was told when I came home that, oh, it's too nice, it's too American, it won't work in our country. In Europe, we think differently. So when I saw this answer from the system, I said that, well, then we need to try, and we need to see how it works. And we will convince, I was told by a judge. Unfortunately, I haven't such a good judge as you have here. I was told that if you can prove that it's working, we are going to take in consideration. So what we did, we start to think at conflicts at the good possibility to transform relationships. Why? Because each crime causes injuries. Each injury, emotionally, mentally, physically, creates needs. And each need creates the response, needs personal, restorative responses. What are these? They are the intervention what we do to meet the needs and to repair the harm. And if we can combine this within a framework which is safe for everybody, it's most likely that the similar crime won't be done again. I won't say that other crimes will be avoided, but at least when we listen to the stories, we are sure that that won't happen again. We are going all together to take responsibility. So that was something what was really relevant from the restorative point of view, because shows that if we try to control things, even if our intentions are very good, people will receive as a punitive, as a punishment interaction. If you would like to help people, but not expecting to them because, oh, they are very poor, or they are very young, or they are very disadvantaged, but we would like to do everything for them, then we will be viewed as permissive, and we will permit that behavior to continue. Also, if we don't do anything, yes, of course, we are neglectful, but the main point is that we start to think what will make a change in somebody's behavior. And we realize that it's not when we do things to the people or we do things for the people, but it will make change when we do things with people. So if we have clear expectation, and sometimes the expectation needs a lot of time to be understood, needs a lot of simple language or a lot of stories to be understood, then we can really have another discussion, because we can see what needs to be done in order to change this behavior. So what can we do for you in order to change that behavior which needs to stop? So this is the restorative way of approaching difficulties, and it's not just in the criminal justice system, it's even in our families. We can start with our children to say, this is what you have to stop, and this is what we can do to make things, or let me know what can we do together to make a change. So, based on these two premises, there are different techniques what we use. Some of them are informal, which means that they didn't need any preparation like a conference. Some of them are formal. When a big problem occurs, we need more time, more energy, and more people to be involved. And between them, there are this type of question what I just mentioned. What happened, how you were affected, what needs to happen, let's come together to see what needs to happen to change the situation, or bring a larger group together and form a circle and see what is happening and what needs to do, what every individual needs to do in order to start to make a change. And also there are the formal conferences, what you are familiar with. The Restorative Justice Conference is one of them. And there is a family group decision-making or family group conference, which is used in, it was actually used in Europe mostly for children. But we realized that when somebody is in risk, it doesn't matter if it's an old person who doesn't have support, or it's a young children who is in risk, or it's somebody who needs employment and nobody around can support. So there are different techniques used in different situations. For example, family group decision-making recently was used in Netherlands to tackle the bank issues, because a lot of people got a lot of loans and from the state or from the bank, and then now they cannot pay it back. So the broader family, the extended family, the friends were invited together to see who can help or support the family to not lose the house or not lose their situation, their economical situation. So it's a broader use of restorative ideas or restorative principles. And what I'm presenting here now, I can give you these small cards. This is what usually people are using, and it's the size of a business card, so you can have it always with you, because it's very simple. It's the way how we start to go into a discussion based on this question. If something wrong happens, we have the three main questions: what happened, who was affected, and what needs to happen next, or what we need to do to make things right. If you start your daily practice with these three questions at least, and then you can also use more, you will see the difference. People will start to look into your eyes and have a discussion, have a different discussion. So, as a conclusion, for restorative practices to be explicit, to be used in a proper way, and to make an impact, we need to take in consideration the social discipline window, the fair process, the restorative question, and there is something else what I won't mention now because it will take another half an hour at least, the affect theory, the psychology of affect. There are points in a discussion when somebody starts to be surprised, to have a different attitude towards you, and it's because of the process. It's starting with fear, with rage, with a lot of negative feeling, but then we reach to a point when we try to be interested in to each other. So there are a lot of background knowledge behind this practice, but it's good to know that it can be used on a daily basis. So what we did in Hungary, first to prove that it's working, we set up day treatment center for troubled youth based just on restorative practices on a daily basis, including family, including the children's or young people's network, including the professionals. And what we teach them is how to use these questions and how to speak about what is going on, even if it's negative or positive as well. During my practice, I realized that in order to change somebody's life, you will have to give a lot of information to the environment. Because, for example, if a student behavior changed, but the environment didn't know what are the small steps with what he achieved or she achieved, at first mistake, everybody will think again, as I told before, he is the one who did something wrong. He is the wrong person. So the small steps are, we need to communicate the small successes to the environment. This is how they will learn what they can do to support the process. So for somebody to become a criminal, it takes few years. So we cannot expect a conference to change a few years of bad behavior. So the conference is the beginning of a new change, of a new life. And this new life or new chance needs to be supported on a daily basis. So this is why it's so important to have the environment being aware of what is their role. For us, for our program, you can see how young I was when we started the program, but for our program, the most successful outcome was that 75% of the students, they were the first small group who was thrown out of each school. They were the worst kids. Now you cannot see that they had such a bad behavior, but 75% of them were able to remain in the school or go back in the school, and 65% of them, the group became larger of course, 65% of them finished successfully the school. And the reason why is because, for example, the student who is in the front, when he was sent to his old school, and he saw that the teacher in the class is trying to make everybody to be quiet, and she started to yell, "Please be quiet, please sit down." He raised his hand and he said, "Instead of working to us or doing things to us, let's set up a circle and bring a talking piece and see what needs to happen to have this class as a successful class." This teacher was the first one who signed up for a training. She said that she never thought that a child can have such a good facilitator skills. So this is how we started to do trainings, and our schools were those who really had a leader with open mind. So even if a teacher was working in a school where the director or the principal was very punitive, she had to work at least a few years to convince with the good stories the rest of the people. So if I can say, or I can suggest, start where is needed. Start where people really want to make changes. You can start in other places as well, but it will take a lot of energy. It's very easy for everybody is to give a simple language, a simple framework to express what you need. So, for example, tackling bullying in school. When you, in the morning, came and you said this and that, I felt very bad or very ashamed or very confused, and what I need is to understand what was your message. So what can we do now? How can we be together in the class feeling differently? This is what children can practice at the age of 5, 6. And it starts to be a very common way of expressing feelings and taking responsibility for the environment of that class. We have a lot of volunteers in schools because of this, but also we started to have the same intervention in the prison. You see here what we call family group decision making, which in fact I was told by a participant that this is a meeting of the family, not a meeting of professionals. So we bring together the family to see what the family can do, what are the local resources, and we bring the professionals to give the information about the local resources, local possibilities, but the family, the extended family, the neighbors, the friends, the supporters will be those who will make the plan to change. That was an idea what made a lot of probation officers in our country to say, oh, that's good, because instead of us thinking what is good for the family in crisis, we will have another plan which will work much more better because it's their plan, it's not our plan. So now we have probation officers all over the country who are helping those who are going to be released from the prison bringing everybody together. Of course, not so many people can enter the prison, but sometimes representatives of the family are going into the prison or are elected by the family, which again, it's a nice process, a restorative process, how to decide who is going to represent the family. And it's very important to have the prison staff involved, because for a mom, for example, who knows that his child, who is now an adult, a criminal, is a good person, it's very important to hear from the prison personnel that this man changed and this man did a lot of good stuff. So it's a lot of acknowledgement of what she knew. So this is what the family needs to hear from the prison staff, because this is how they regain the trust in working together or in having this person back. So all these interactions are helping not just those who are in prison for small so they're helping everyone independently of the crime. So for example, we have here a picture of a person who was murdered.